All right, today we're diving into a source that takes on one of the most cemented stories in all of history, the narrative of Adolf Hitler. Now, this isn't about letting him off the hook, not at all. It's about looking at how that story was built. So let's get right into it.
My spirit will rise from the grave, and the world will see I was right. These are supposedly some of Hitler's last words. It's a really chilling prophecy, and as our source material points out, it's found a pretty disturbing echo in some corners of the internet today.
And this really gets to the heart of the conflict our source is digging into. On one side, you have the absolute historical consensus. He was a monster. But on the other, you've got this growing online movement claiming he was, and I'm quoting here, absolutely right. It's a shocking difference of opinion that forces us to ask a really important question.
So, what is the real story here? Is the version we all learned in school the whole, complete truth? Or, as this analysis pushes us to consider, is there an other side to this narrative that has been, well, intentionally hidden from view? That's what we're here to unpack.
According to the source material, Hitler's entire reputation as the ultimate villain, the big bad of history, really rests on three unshakable pillars. These are the three core arguments that mainstream history uses to define his evil, and we're going to break them down one by one. So you've got the Holocaust, right? Then there's starting World War II, and finally, weaponizing anti-Semitism on a scale never seen before. These are the foundations of his infamy. But our source argues that while these facts are undeniably horrific, the context around them has been simplified to create one single convenient villain.
But before we can even start to tackle those pillars, the source insists we have to understand the world that made Hitler possible in the first place. It argues he wasn't just born in a vacuum, he literally rose from the ashes of a nation in complete and total collapse.
And the speed of Germany's collapse was just staggering. First, a humiliating defeat in World War I. That's followed by the Treaty of Versailles, which our source says basically crippled the entire nation financially. This leads to hyperinflation so insane that people were literally using suitcases full of cash just to buy a loaf of bread. And then, as if that wasn't enough, the Great Depression hits and society just plunges into desperation.
Into this chaos steps a guy who our source portrays as a master opportunist. He promised to bring back national pride, he wrote out his entire ideology in Mein Kampf, and he used all that economic pain to build a massive following. His political rivals completely underestimated him and just handed him the chancellorship. But after that very suspicious Reichstag fire, he grabbed emergency powers and became an absolute dictator. Okay, so let's get back to those pillars. We're going to start with the first one, mass murder. And here, our source makes a really provocative, data-driven comparison to challenge the idea that Hitler is completely alone at the top of this grim list. The source starts by making one thing crystal clear: the unforgivable horror of the Holocaust. 6 million lives, systematically and brutally extinguished. It's a number that is, and it should be, just staggering. But then, it asks a really challenging question. And this question is absolutely central to the argument. Was he the deadliest leader of the 20th century? It forces a comparison that you don't often see in mainstream history, and it leads to a pretty jarring look at the numbers. So here, the source presents this really stark comparison. You look at the estimated death tolls from Mao Zedong's man-made famines in China or Joseph Stalin's purges and gulags, and the numbers are just astronomical. The argument here is that if you're going by the raw metric of lives lost, Hitler, while obviously a horrific mass murderer, is not number one. And this leads to a core idea about how historical stories get told. The one who wins the war writes history. The source claims this is the key. See, the winners needed a simple story with a clear, singular villain. And as the loser of the war, Hitler was the perfect person to carry the entire weight of the world's evil, which allowed the crimes of others, including some of the winners, to be kind of pushed to the side or forgotten. All right, let's move on to that second pillar, anti-Semitism. The common story is that Hitler was the modern architect of this hatred, but our source argues he didn't actually invent it. He just tapped into a deep, ancient river of it that was already flowing and figured out how to weaponize its power. To make this point, the source uses this timeline to show that the persecution of Jewish people is, tragically, a global thing that goes back millennia. I mean, from ancient empires to medieval Europe and even into the modern Middle East, this hatred was there long, long before Hitler was ever born. So, you see,
Our source presents Hitler as this master manipulator. He tapped into religious conflicts that were already simmering, he amplified the conspiracy theory that Germany was betrayed in World War I, and he turned a minority into the perfect scapegoat for all of the nation's problems. He didn't create the fire, he just poured gasoline all over it.
Okay, so that brings us to the final pillar, the idea that Hitler alone started World War II. And here, the source introduces this concept of a shared evil, arguing that the blame is actually spread out a lot more widely than we're usually taught. And it all starts with the Treaty of Versailles. The source has this really clever wordplay for it. It wasn't a peace treaty, P-E-A-C-E. It was a peace treaty, P-I-E-C-E. It was so punishing, it literally broke Germany into pieces, economically, militarily, that it created the perfect breeding ground for another war.
And here's the thing, he was not acting alone. You had Britain and France's appeasement policies, which basically gave him a green light. The Soviet Union literally signed a deal with him to carve up Poland. Major American corporations were doing business with his regime, and other aggressive powers like Japan and Italy were on the march too. This was not an isolated actor in an otherwise peaceful world.
So the crucial point here is this. Our source concludes that World War II was really the result of all these collective global failures and widespread aggression, but history needed a simple cause, a single spark to blame for the whole explosion. And Hitler became that spark.
This quote just perfectly sums up the source's whole perspective. It suggests that there were a lot of villains on the world stage, but because he was the one who lost the war, the spotlight of history was fixed solely on him, leaving everyone else in the shadows.
And that's the final, really provocative thought this analysis leaves us with. It's a question that challenges all of us to look beyond the simple narratives we're given and to think a little more critically about how history itself is actually constructed.